I want to start actually with a bit of an apology. So the apology is to Keith and the guys here because of the intro that I gave to the last NZN meeting for those who attended that. So the last meeting was the keynote presentation was from a guy called Mike Houlihan, the CFO of Horizon Power, talking about all the exciting things that they're doing in the electricity sector to get to 100% renewables. So to set the scene for that, I put up a slide a bit like this, which showed the emissions in WA and how they vary across different sectors. And there were two reasons that I put this up. So one was that I wanted to show how electricity contributes to all of the different sectors. And so it was really important that we focused on tackling electricity emissions and reducing those. But the other thing that I was keen to point out with that slide was that we shouldn't become too transfixed on the residential sector, because there's so much of the problem which is systemic, which we need to tackle across all these different industrial sectors as well. And that played nicely to that story about needing to drive down the emissions associated with electricity. So it's a great intro to the previous talk, but it's an absolutely terrible intro to this talk. And I knew that at the time as I was talking about it, because I knew that we had this coming up. And so I downplayed residential then, but I think I can backtrack from that without actually changing the facts. First thing to point out is that WA is actually a bit of an odd case. So in WA, we have the oil and gas industry, we have mining, and we have other heavy industry, which really drives up emissions in non-residential sectors. And so that makes the residential sector look smaller. If you, on the other hand, look globally, energy associated and emissions associated, with energy which comes from buildings is about 17 or 18% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a really, really big number, and it's a sector which is well worth tackling. The other thing is to think about the kind of decisions that we make in relation to housing and buildings. So they're very different to other decisions which we make in our lives, because they're large, high cost decisions which we make relatively rarely. One example from my own life, which you may have seen because I posted it on LinkedIn last week, was that I installed a home battery. So this cost me $17,000. Adrian was joking earlier that maybe that's why the money box is over there, so I can slowly get that back. The amount of CO2 it will save will be about 2 tons per year. And I'll probably never see the total return on the investment. So it works out as about $200 or $250 per ton of CO2 saved. So it's a pretty expensive way to save CO2, actually. But the reason it was appealing as a decision was because it was the kind of decision I only have to make once. So right now we live in a society where pretty much everything that we do creates emissions, and it's completely exhausting to try and think about that all the time. So when you go to the supermarket, thinking about the decisions you make, thinking about the other procurement choices of all the little things that we buy in our lives. But what we do with housing and with buildings can be really chunky, big decisions, which we can make once, and then it can be paying back to us day after day, month after month, and year after year. So I think that's another reason why housing and buildings is a really important sector for us to look into. So I'm super excited to welcome these four today to talk about that. I'm personally very interested to hear about what more I can do in my personal life to make a difference through the housing where I live. What can I retrofit to my house? What might I think about in the future? And also what I might be able to take away into my work as well. And I'm sure you're thinking the same things yourself. So just before I hand over back to Keith to take us through the panel, I'm just going to ask Alan to come on over. Alan is another co-founder of the NZN, and he's just going to explain, for those of you who haven't been here before, how we run an NZN meeting and what will happen after the panel discussion.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, so just to share, for those of you that haven't been to a meeting before, we have a 3-part structure to try and keep us disciplined and focused through these meetings. And it's basically inform, empower, and act. So what you're about to hear from our 4 experts here is the inform section, something new, something you maybe haven't heard of before, something to inspire you. That's the inform section of our meetings. The second section is empower, and our expert facilitator in the corner there, Steve. Yeah, no, that's you, Steve. Steve's fantastic facilitating what we just heard. So what have we heard? What does it mean to us personally? How does that change our behavior? What can we take away from that? And this is where you get involved. So please get involved, get your voice in the room, and really make that facilitation part valuable.
And that goes to the guys online as well.
The guys online as well, absolutely. So this is participating for virtually as well. And the final part is the ACT part. So as Max has always said in our meetings, this isn't just a talk fest. We want to make a difference. We want to have a pragmatic approach to this. So the last part is ACT. So what do we do out of this meeting? What do we take away? What can we take forward from what we've just heard? And also we usually review what we've done in other meetings. We have a Trello board, which you can all access to see what we're doing as we go along. So we're trying to plot progress and move forward month by month, meeting by meeting. So inform, empower, act. And I'm like Max, I'm really excited to listen to our 4 panelists today because this is going to be a very interesting session. And I think something we all have a lot of passion for. So looking forward to it. I think, Keith, you're going to facilitate.
That's the theory. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to. So the first thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to. Technology. Can't live with it and you can't shoot it. You can just bring us up to the second slide, the presentation structure. Right. So I'm going to start with a basic introduction, why housing is important, an important part of the solution to climate change. Then I'm going to introduce Matt. Matt is a building designer, and he's going to give us a basic, I like to call it passive solar for dummies. He's going to let us know, because we have, and I talk about the housing industry as a whole, have done such a terrible job of promoting and marketing this way of building and designing your homes that I find that 90% of the people that I speak to have no idea. They say, passive solar, is that like solar panels? No, it's a design solution, and Matt's going to give you a brief introduction. Now, this is going to be amazing because Melinda is a town planner, and she's going to talk about town planning as the solution to climate change. And then she's going to change hats. It's going to be like magic. And she's going to talk to us about Cooperation Housing, which is the other organization that she's involved in, as another part of, because one of the biggest issues facing the world, in addition to climate change, is housing affordability. And Cooperation Housing bridges that line between those two issues of climate change and housing affordability in a way that's just amazing. And then Andrew's going to circle back around. Andrew is going to talk to us about microgrids, solar panel systems, and all sorts of really groovy stuff, which I don't really understand, but he does. And so we don't all have to understand. Cool. So let's see if I can press the right button. Oh, look, that's me. Okay. Let's see what happens when I press it again. Yeah, no, I'm doing 2 at once. I don't know what I'm doing. So why housing? We start with the big picture. So what I like to talk about is what I call the myth of cheap and abundant energy. Everything in our society has been designed based on 2 myths. Cheap oil, because we've never required the fossil fuel industry to pay for the externalities, the damage they're doing to the environment, the damage they're doing to people. So it's always been cheap. So everything we do, including the way we design our houses, is based around the idea that fossil fuels are cheap. Back in the 1960s, my mother was told, don't bother insulating your 1920s house because heating oil in New Jersey was so cheap that it would never pay for itself. That changed sort of 5 years later when the oil crisis happened, entirely manufactured. The other part of that myth has been abundant. We had lots of it. Just like a drunken sailor on shore leave thinks they have lots of money until it runs out. So we've been living on this like drunken sailors for a long time. So we need to re-examine every single system that we have. And one of those is housing. Let's see if I can get this in the right order. Right, okay. So this is WA's, you can see this is all of Australia's energy usage. And I was actually really stunned because when you look at all the glossy magazines, they show lots of wind farms. Guess what? Look at that tiny little gray line up at the top. Yeah, most of our power is coming from fossil fuels. So when you stop burning fossil fuels, so when you stop using electricity for heating, anything like that, it's mostly stopping fossil fuels. I think that's a good thing. Let's see if this works.
Is that the gas reserve price rate? Is that right?
I don't know. Max probably knows, but
The statistics which Keith just put up, they were energy use statistics.
Yeah, but our share of gas is really big.
Energy use,
yeah,
Ignoring export, so those don't export.
yeah, that's,
But it's more than just electricity.
yes, okay.
Do you want me to get out of the way of the screen?
Feel like everyone's looking at that.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling I've got my head, yeah, on the slump, sit down.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a
sorry,
program.
it's. Oh, there's the slide I was looking for. I skipped to. So you can't see it, but yeah, okay. The bar all the way to the left is heating and cooling. This one says 40%. I've heard it as high as 48%. So if we design our houses so that they are warm in the winter and cool in the summer with minimal additional energy, we can immediately, in each of these houses, eliminate most of that energy expense. Now, if you then add to things like using more energy efficient appliances, you can drop that down a lot further, LED lighting. And if you're then using electricity instead of gas to do your cooking, it gets even better. So this is, it seems so, according to Max, who put up that very cruel graph, it's only about 12% of our energy use. But we can, by using better design, pretty much knock that in half right away. And I'm going to point this in the right direction. Oh, right. Okay. I think there was another one in there. This is the big one. See, I did this in pink because I really liked it. The thing I really like about housing and the way I've focused the last 6 years, it's a really dramatic difference. There are a lot of the solutions to climate change that our lives aren't really that much different. You put solar panels on the roof. Yeah, okay, you don't have any energy bills, but you got to pay it off and it's a long, slow route. A lot of the other. But the people who are living in passive solar houses, they just tell me their lives are so good. And this is why I want this to become mainstream. Now, probably a lot of you are not going to build a house this year, but you probably know somebody who does plan on building a house or is a part of a housing cooperative or something. And what I keep saying to people is friends, don't let friends build badly. So we want to get this out into the mainstream, this idea, this is a much better way of living. And it's not rocket science. Although Matt will tell you differently because he's got a living to make. So I've spent the last 6 years going to people who are living in passive solar houses and interviewing them. What's it like living in a passive solar house? And I want to run through this because Matt's going to tell you the mechanics of it, how it works. But I want to tell you about the actually living in a passive solar energy efficiently designed house. So Manuela is in Hilton. She's got a straw bale house. It looks like a regular double brick house. They've done something amazing with the way they did the formwork around it. So it doesn't look like a squishy hippie house, strangely enough. I'm a squishy hippie. I like squishy hippie houses, but yeah. So I said, Manuel, what's it like on a cold winter's morning? She said, glad you asked, Keith. The coldest day last winter, 17.5 degrees. It was about 2 or 3 outside. We turned on the air conditioner. It raised the temperature 1.5 degrees. We turned it off. We didn't run it again for the rest of the winter. So people often ask me, well, what about these really, when we have 6 hot days in a row or 6 cold days in a row? So would you rather run your air conditioner for 10 days of the year or 360? That's the difference. Hottest day of the year, same house, 40 degrees outside, you know, cool, reasonable summer, unlike the one we've just had. 27.5 degrees inside, turned on the air conditioner for an hour, dropped it down to 26 degrees, turned it off, never ran it again for the rest of the summer. Didn't need to. Christmas Day this year, it was 42.3 here in Perth. So I messaged 6 of the people that I've previously interviewed, average temperature inside. Everybody died and caught on fire on that day, didn't you? You hated it, right? Ran the air conditioner all day long, we're still hot. In these houses, the 6 people I talked to, average temperature was 25 degrees. One person had an air conditioner, which he ran for an hour in the afternoon, turned it off, went to bed. All of them had ceiling fans, so they were running ceiling fans. A ceiling fan will drop the perceived temperature by 2 to 3 degrees in a house. When you live in a well-designed house, having a ceiling fan running is enough. One woman, I asked her, so, you know, how is it in the summer? She said, oh yeah, we turned them on 3 times last year. I said, the air conditioning? Because I was looking around and there was no air conditioner. She said, no, the ceiling fans. So 362 days of the year, it was comfortable enough to not have an air conditioner and not even have ceiling fans on. That's what. Wendy and Ian's house. Went to them last June. It was a really cold morning. It was about 2 or 3 degrees because most have been talking about the heat. And I walked into the house and it was just so warm. You know that feeling you walk into a house and it's just like, I don't really want to leave here ever. It was beautiful inside. Now this house, they'd finished a year before, but they still hadn't put any curtains on the windows. So the house would have worked a lot more efficiently with curtains on the window, but they hadn't gotten around to it. And so I don't know what the temperatures were. I didn't read them, but it was just beautiful inside. It had been about 2 degrees that night. It was a really cold morning. By the time we got there at lunch, the sun had come up, warmed the floor. It was lovely. Oh, and the last one is Kim. I loved Kim's place. Again, house out in Harrisdale. The coldest day last year. It was just so bitterly cold. And I walked in, and the first thing I did was take my jacket off because it was almost too hot in there. And I said, Kim, have you been running the air conditioner? Because he's the guy that has the air conditioner. He said, no. That's just the heat of the sun. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. The film crew, the very first thing they do is they all take their shoes off and they're sitting around in their stocking feet, which I was so jealous of because I'm, you know, the talent and I have to look respectable. So I have to leave my shoes on. Floor is warm. Solutions to climate change can create a future which is just magnificent. And that's really what I'm on about with housing, is not the end of the world and the death of the seals and all the rest of, you know, Venice being underwater, but creating a future for our children and our grandchildren, which is glorious. And to me, the passive solar house and the better ways of living are the perfect example of that. And I've crapped on long enough, so I'm going to pass you over to Matt. Let's see, can we? Oh, So Matt's going to talk about energy efficiency in buildings. And yeah, now that you know how wonderful it is, he's going to tell you how it works.
Thanks, Keith. That was magnificent, mate. I was taken to a new place listening to you then. So it's a rather dry sounding, Keith has portrayed it as it really is. This is slightly drier sounding. Oh, the bottom button. That one. Oh, that one. Yeah. Okay. So actually, contrary to this is, I Googled this, so we'll have to work out what's exactly correct. But I came up with buildings generate nearly 40% of the annual global emissions, and operations running the building is about 28%. So the manufacture of the materials is only about 11, but you've got the bulk of the energy in buildings in the actual operations and running of the building. So that's an important, they're both important, obviously. You can do low embodied materials for the bottom 11, but the running of the building over the 30, 50, 100 years is really, really important. So there are two main streams of energy efficient building design. Keith has just outlined the glories of passive solar design. And there's also the passive house, which a lot of you probably have heard of if you've watched Grand Designs. You know, you see the guy with the big fan on the doorway testing to see if the house is airtight. That's passive house, those sort of houses. So we'll have a look at, I'm just going to run through quickly the 5 main points for each one. And if you can remember those, you're going to walk away from here tonight fairly empowered to know, you know, the guts. And yes, it is relatively simple in reality, but you'll know these principles, and it's quite empowering to know that if you ever make a decision in the future to build a new home, you'll be able to go, wow, you know, I know the 5 principles. You can pick one or the other, and away you go. So these two types of these two streams, passive solar design can save you anywhere from 25 to 75% of your heating and cooling, and passive house is designed to save you 90%. Passive house is measurable. It is a German-based system, engineered. Everything is designed and measured down to the, you know, decimal place, which is pretty cool. I don't really love physics, but I did the course and my brain was whirring, having to absorb all the physics of it, but it's pretty amazing. Passive solar design is more intuitive, but it has principles that obviously work really well. So we'll do passive solar design first. Have a look at the 5 keys. Actually, before we do the 5 keys, we'll look at one example of how you might approach a passive solar design house plan. On the left, this was a plan I was given to look at to see if it could be improved recently. That north is at 45 degrees on the site, which is a tricky angle for the, you know, for a north point on any site. And the street is to the left. They've basically oriented all their living areas to the rear, to the sort of southeast. Dining, living, and pool area. Double garages in the key point up there in the north. And so I thought, well, how can we you know, spin this around, improve this to use passive solar design principles? And what I've come up here with is tilting the living area, bringing them out to the front to the north, and tilting them so that they are up to 20 degrees off true north, and that works fairly well. And then I also, this is something that's interesting, we deleted a room in the house to save a bit of money, and it was just a couple living there, and they were fine with not having a home theatre. And then, so their house is actually probably a bit more economical to build, and yet it just opens up the garden and creates this beautiful outdoor living area. And we've got such an amazing climate here that not using our outdoor spaces is, you know, rooms of the house is counterintuitive. So, and they're ecstatic with this. And it was just a really good example of how, and it was a bit tricky because obviously the north is at the wrong angle. It's at the front of the house. But I've suggested having a, like a quite thick hedging at the front to give a private front yard. So there's ways of solving complex problems and making it work. So getting on to the 5 principles. Well, sorry, orientation was the first, and sorry, that was the slide to show that. Obviously, your outdoor living, if you can get it to the north, it is fantastic. Your living areas oriented there, and bedrooms and bathrooms can be to the south. It isn't always possible to do this, but there are things you can do to mitigate it if you can't actually do that. So the second important principle is the design of how the sun enters the house. On the left, the sun is high altitude in the summer, low in the winter. And I mean, that's a principle most people understand these days about, having the eaves designed correctly. And our problem in Perth is more the summer than the winter, like keeping the heat out than trying to keep buildings warm. But you really want to do both, but always lean towards, trying to keep the heat out of a house in Perth. And on the left, east-west windows, you've got the sun coming in low. So you've got to deal with that. And there's various techniques you can use to do that. But I really just want to run through quickly so you know what the 10 principles are. So insulation, that's like Keith was saying, wasn't that popular in the 1960s, and now our government even supports insulation. We had that semi-disaster thing of the free insulation a few years ago, but that's obviously important. Thermal mass is what Keith illustrated was the concrete slab heating up. You can do that with other materials inside the house, concrete walls, rammed earth or heavy brick walls, or reverse brick veneer external walls where the thermal mass is on the inside of the building. And then cross ventilation is another really important principle where, you're using, our cooling breezes, obviously in WA, it's the Freo Doctor. And, there's ways of positioning windows and doors within rooms and the whole house to make it be able to, be flushed out when you take advantage of those breezes. So my own house is here. I had a pergola where had sail shades, and I took them off before that tree grew. I used to, have that as a temporary shade, take it off and have the winter sun came in, and it really went past halfway into the house. It was really magnificent. And I remember walking to my house one day when it was about 40 degrees, and I walked in and it really felt like it was air conditioned. I was like, wow, this really does work. So that was kind of cool. And then you've got your deciduous tree out the front there. So that was my own house that I built in Hilton that worked really well. So what about passive house? Well, there's the 5 keys there: insulation, advanced windows, air tightness, absence of thermal bridges, and heat recovery ventilation. We'll just take you through those quickly. So with increased ventilation, you actually don't need, it's amazing in Perth to achieve those really high standards of passive house. You don't actually need much more insulation than a regular house because our climate is relatively mild. So passive house is not overly expensive to achieve in Perth, which actually I was with a guy today going through it, and he's come up with a really good system to make it quite affordable. Second principle is advanced window technologies. I mean, for Perth people, double glazing is advanced. In Europe, they don't use double glazing. It's not advanced enough. So it's all relative. They only use triple glazing, and thermally broken. So if that's an aluminium window, you don't want the heat transferred through the frame. So you'll have, plastic gaskets, etc., to stop heat transfer through the actual window frame. So that's a bit of a minimum. I mean, it's a good idea, really. Double glazing is not a bad idea to put in any house, not just passive house. So, and it's got a lot more affordable in Perth of recent times. Number 3, air tightness. So what passive house does is it seals up the house very well, so you're not losing and gaining energy through all the little gaps in a house. And that actually does save a lot of energy. And they do this by using intelligent membranes that allow vapor to breathe through them or permeate them, which avoids mold. And so it's a healthier house. And these membranes aren't really much more. They're only $1 to $3 per square meter more than builders' membranes that are available in Perth anyway. So they're not actually, he was telling me today, the supplier of these, and he was just explaining that they're not actually, you get a far superior building for not much more cost. So to me, that's a terrific investment. 4, designing out thermal bridges. So a lot of our houses, you'll have a steel beam going from inside to outside. Obviously, that's just it's a highway for heat to come in and out. So what you do there is you have the structure independent, and so that steel doesn't come straight through to the inside of the house. So you've got to watch out for stuff like that. In Europe, they will actually insulate the slab, but we don't need to in Perth because we just don't need to achieve that. To get to passive house standards, we don't need that degree of insulation. And lastly, because the house is so well sealed, it has a mechanical ventilation system, which is a little bit of a cost, but it means that it's got a very low energy fan that's doing a continual job of basically keeping pure air in your home. So this is wonderful for people with allergies. We've got smoke issues. You can put a HEPA, are they called HEPA filters? HEPA filters, sorry. You can put them on if we've got bushfires and clean up your air. They obviously chew up a bit more energy because they're doing more work. But so this is a ducted system. It takes out the dirty air from the bathroom and kitchen and supplies clean air into the living areas and bedrooms. And it's basically exchanging the heat in a little box. So that's a pretty smart system. And so that's passive house. There's a few stats there. It guarantees keeping the house 20 to 25 degrees 90% of the time. It's got heating and cooling loads that are, guaranteed. It guarantees humidity cannot exceed 60% of relative humidity, and the air tightness is less than 0.6 air changes per hour, measured in at the energy rating of 50 pascals. And that most of our houses would have an air change of 20, 30. Our houses actually have air coming in and out, and a lot of the energy is lost throughout, like I mentioned earlier, but they guarantee a very low loss of and gain of air through the building. So passive house versus passive solar design, who wins? And the simple answer to me is, well, how green is enough green? If you did either of these, you're making a huge contribution. I think that there is a little bit of a war, but not a war. There's a bit of discussion between both believers of these styles of energy efficient housing, but I prefer to sit very comfortably on the fence and say, hey, I reckon if you did either, you're doing a magnificent job. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. I love the mechanics of this way of building. It just all makes so much sense. I'm going to pass right along to Melinda, who's going to talk about town planning and how we can design our cities better.
Thanks, Keith. Where's the best place to stand? Over here? Yep. Okay, yeah, cool. All right, yeah, so I thought I would just start off with what is town planning, because believe it or not, a lot of people don't know. They think that it is this, and it's definitely not. Yeah, every time I mention I'm a town planner, they tend to say, oh, what's with all the roundabouts and traffic lights? And I'm like, yeah, that's not what we do. So just put a little definition up there. It is a technical and political process that is focused on the development and use of land with a primary concern of public welfare. I mean, they've had town planning around since the start of civilization, but they say that it really sort of its birth was in England, sort of in the late 1800s with the garden cities movement, and that was all about trying to counteract the slums and all the disease and things that were rampant at that time. So it was trying to get people out into the fresh air and open space and things like that to make them better. And yeah, it pretty much everything, any type of development and probably involves some sort of town planning, and it involves a lot of other different disciplines as well. So how can town planning impact climate change? Well, I've looked at it in sort of the way of actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also actions that build resilience. So your typical mitigation and adaptation. The actions that build resilience to climate change. Currently, we've got a few different policies around bushfire planning, coastal planning, water planning. Obviously, it's drying up, so we've got to be careful how much we use. Tree retention, and also renewable energy support. They do actually have a policy about how we can help support more renewable energy projects from a planning point of view. When we look at the actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they'll primarily fit into urban and building design that encourages walking, cycling, and public transport use. So that, the way that cycle and pedestrian paths are laid out, how walkable the environment is, parking provision, too much or too regulating that can have an impact on how much people walk, cycle, and use public transport. The compactness of the urban form, what they call transit-orientated development. So development, density and housing that's concentrated around train stations and public transport hubs. So it makes it easier to use public transport rather than jumping in your car. And also obviously end and trip facilities also help with people using, cycling too. And then what Matt and Keith have touched on is the site and building design that reduces electricity use. So your solar passive design, and that can be suburbs as well as houses, and tree retention and planting. I mean, there's probably some others that I've forgotten, but I think these are the main ones. So as far as suburb design, we've actually got some regulations about how new subdivisions should be laid out to optimise people would be able to build solar passive design houses. So what Matt mentioned before about orientation, just making sure that the lots are either lined up to true north or just a few degrees of it to make sure that you can build something that maximises that winter sun. And also there are, when you get down into the building details too, there are actually rules and regulations about how you build to make sure that you have your cross ventilation and your solar penetration, which Matt talked about. And now I'm going to switch my hat, as Keith said, and I'm going to talk about co-housing because it's something else that I came across a few years ago. And as a town planner and interested in how our built form can impact on how we live and to live more sustainably, I really got interested in this topic and delved into it. And I now actually work part-time for a not-for-profit organisation called Cooperation Housing, and we specialise in cooperative housing, which generally is around this co-housing model. So co-housing is defined as a group of private homes and shared facilities where neighbours collaboratively manage the community together. And I've got a couple of examples here. The top one is, I think there are about 15 dwellings in Denmark in the southwest, and they are orientated around a central garden. And this one down here is based in Lathlain, and that's it's a group of about 4 dwellings, I think this one is. And why is co-housing great for climate change? Well, from my perspective, it's the sharing of resources and responsibilities. When you get together and all contribute to looking after the chickens or doing productive gardens, or you can even as part of the community have a electric car share or something like that. It's basically when you get together and you collaborate, the sum is more than a single part. I think these are a couple of, site design as well is also instrumental. And we talk about this a lot with some of the workshops that we do about getting away from, when you go increase your density, getting away from these triplex and quadruplex developments where it's just boundary to boundary roofs and a long concrete driveway down the side, no trees, no vegetation. I mean, you can sort of see it like this type of design here in comparison to the one I've got in the middle there, where you can see it's quite lush and green, and they're all orientated to the north to get that solar passive design. And the key thing with all of these three here is that parking is on the periphery. They don't have driveways and double garages to get to their houses. They've got parking on the edges here, and yeah. So it just that not only allows a lot more open space, but it also encourages neighbour interaction. So when you're walking from your car to your dwelling, if you bump into your neighbour, you say hello, and maybe pop in for a cup of tea or something. Another couple of examples here. This is one over in Hammy Hill, where we're actually, again, we've got the car parking at the front here. And whilst this is an old driveway, it's just going to be a pedestrian leg now going through a massive big open space area. And I don't have an aerial of this one, but there's a big jacaranda tree in the middle. And that's actually 4 dwellings on that site. So 2 little micro apartments. This is a little micro dwelling there, and then the original house. So from a climate change perspective, again, this is, keeping vegetation obviously helps to cool the environment and therefore use a lot less energy. And you're also not putting a lot of waste to landfill, because you're utilising the existing buildings. There's a lot of benefits for the environment, not just from a climate change perspective. The one I've got over the top is actually one we're working on at the moment in the Witchcliffe Eco Village. I don't know if anyone's heard about that. And that's going to be that we're actually designing that in collaboration with the future residents. So they've worked with an architect to design the whole site, and then how the dwellings would be laid out. And so they're actually, it's basically a co-developer rather than building your own single house. They're building this whole development as a group. And so the main benefit of that is they get their houses at cost. So most sort of medium high density development in Perth is built by a developer, someone that does it for a living. And they are primarily concerned about profit. And so they will obviously put a profit onto the costs that they have when they build. With this, because the residents are the developers, there's no developer cost. So they get their housing at cost as well. So again, another reason to collaborate, because you've got that power of numbers. The other one down on the bottom there is a co-housing development that's been around for about 30 years now. There was actually dedicated, and that was it's called Pinakari. It's in Hammy Hill, and you can again see how lush it is because of the fact that all the parking's on the periphery. And that's it for me.
I'm going to keep quite tight on time if that's okay. Sure, we might skip the video if I can. Hey guys, I'm Andrew. I'm an environmental scientist. My focus is energy management in buildings or utilities in buildings, anything that uses energy. I've managed everything from commercial buildings and universities through to residential accommodation, apartment buildings, that kind of stuff. So I've got a question for everyone that I'd just like to hear some quick responses on. Does anyone know what a microgrid is? Well, you do, but not Jay. Yeah. Yes, but not the answer I'm looking for. Anyone else?
The US Department of Energy has a definition.
Yep. 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 So essentially, my definition of a microgrid is something that is, yeah, self-reliant, a mini grid that has backup power, essentially. So technically, it's not a microgrid unless it can run all the facilities in the event of a grid outage, if it's grid connected, or as an islanded microgrid. So generally, it has to have batteries or a diesel generator, but we're now getting to the point where we can have solar, batteries, wind, whatever renewable energy, and a backup power supplier, which we like to use as a battery. And if you're Western Power, they like to add on a diesel generator for an extra layer of redundancy. So why microgrids to combat climate change? So we've just heard about energy efficiency. Obviously, buildings consume energy. We've seen sort of the different areas they consume energy. You know, the biggest killers are your HVAC and heating hot water, which make up about 60% of residential building energy use. So there's a big shift to 100% electric buildings, remove gas consumption from cooking, from heating hot water, or from heating for air conditioning purposes. There's lots of extremely energy efficient technology which helps us do that. So gas is typically less than 1 unit of gas consumption equals 1 unit of heat or heating hot water. And there's a requirement now if you're building a 6-star, which is world leadership, Green Star building, which is a rating scheme, a bit like Passive House, you must be 100% electric today. So then we want to shift to 100% electric transportation. So why is that important to microgrids? Well, we've got to have electric vehicle chargers somewhere, and they're going to be in our buildings, wherever our parking is. If it's on the periphery, on the streets, they might be private chargers, they might be public. They need to interact with the microgrid or the building's energy supply network. Then we've got a whole bunch of different types of mobility. So we've got e-mobility. I don't know if anyone's been to Scarborough recently and seen the little e-scoots around that you can jump on and hire. So it's perfect for sort of co-housing, community housing, these types of developments. We can have either common electric vehicles for an apartment building or community. And it's cheap to charge. They're extremely energy efficient. So battery electric vehicles are around 90 to 97% energy efficient, depending on how they're getting their electricity supply, versus a combustion engine, which is about 35% efficiency when you take into consideration that you've got to extract the oil from the ground, ship it, process it, burn it. You got all the waste heat and exhaust and so on. Then we got low cost utilities. So microgrids can help provide low cost utilities because they're distributed renewable energy resources. So solar, batteries. Sorry, I'll take questions at the end.
It seems to me transport would be a much bigger polluter than ours.
But they're related, right? Everyone has a car typically, and that transport orientated development that we saw before in the town planning.
We'll do questions at the end.
So I would also classify transportation as distributed renewable energy resources or distributed energy resources, because as we transition to 100% electric transportation, suddenly we've got vehicles, whether it be public buses, trains, cars, battery electric cars, or even smaller scooters and bikes, all with batteries that can interact, store renewable energy, solar, wind, when it is cheap, and export it. That's getting into where we're starting to talk about integrated microgrids. So when I say market and smart grids is anything that's internet connected. So all the microgrids that I provide are all or work with, we're trying to get to all of the devices connected to the internet. So all the cars, solar installations, which is now a requirement through Synergy since Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. So we're getting towards a legislative smart grid anyway. And then we're going to get these grids talking to the main grid so we can help people save more money. Generally, a virtual power plant will knock off 10 to 20% is what we're seeing on the East Coast. It's only possible to do that where we have cooperative housing, strata, or commercial here in Western Australia, which uses more than 50,000 kilowatt hours a year, unless there's other circumstances. Little bit about sort of Green Star and this 100% electrification. So here's where we're at now. And we're steadily getting rid of gas by 2023. So any 5-star building, Green Star, which now there's a residential product for land developments, by 2023 for 5 stars and 2026 for best practice. You can still see there's a long way out to 2030 to get to a legal compliance through the National Construction Code of Australia. But we do have elements creeping in. So the latest NCC requires you to have 9 meters squared, I think, of north facing roof, which is one of these town planning type requirements. So just a quick case study. Here's a building we did 3 years ago, put 20 kilowatts of solar, 30 kilowatt hours of battery storage. We've got electricity meters in there. They're connected to our PowerLedger peer-to-peer trading platform. That knocks off 30% of the cost versus Synergy A1 for all the residents and the commercial unit. I'm delivering the building, so I get cheaper energy at no upfront cost to the developer. Developers are trying to do the right thing, but they are in it for a profit. So these types of new business models help reduce cost. And this was 3 years ago, so it's been operating pretty flawlessly, and haven't really had any issues with the batteries. So operating pretty good. And this is officially the most sustainable apartment building outside of New South Wales. It's the only 6-star neighbours rated apartment building for energy. It's also timber constructed, first mid-rise timber constructed apartment building. Lots of other cool features, but don't have time to go through that. I was going to run through the video, which I think is next for Witchcliff, but I think we're going to run out of time. So we can share that link out, or you can jump on our website on Witchcliff Eco Village's website and check it out. There's a 45-minute video. I extracted the energy section because it's long if you get trapped on it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Short and sweet.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I think I'd like to get into the Empower section with Steve. There was one question from online which I thought was worth asking though, which was the passive house stuff sounds amazing. How do you do it if you're not building a house from brand new?
You can. Yeah, they do have a system of retrofitting in passive house. So you can achieve that on a retrofit situation. That they drop the standard a tiny bit, but yes, you can do it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Right, Steve, coming up. Okay, cool. All right. So for this bit, we're going to be moving around a bit. Is it possible to move these cables?
Yes.
Do I need to talk to this?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to clear the chairs. We're all going to be standing around. What we've been hearing, I pulled on cards, so we're basically going to be exploring some of the. Yeah, good idea. Thank you, Adrian. So the first things we heard from Keith, I'm going to spread them out on the floor. The first thing was housing is a climate change solution that would dramatically improve the quality of life. We also heard from Keith, most household energy use is heating and cooling. And we also heard WA energy use is mostly fossil fuels. And from Matt, things I caught from Matt was about passive solar design and the 5 key, what do you call them? 5 key? The 5 keys. Okay, the 5 keys. Easy. 25 to 75% saving. Passive house, 90% saving, and that also has 5 keys. And then from Melinda, we heard about actions that reduce greenhouse gases. I only caught the ones on there which I thought were relevant to maybe people in here rather than what a town planner might do, but you could extend it. Neighbors collaboratively managing the community, sharing resources, and site design. And then from Andrew, what I heard was 100% electric buildings, 100% electric transportation, low cost utilities. Can I get rid of this? Gee, I'm sweating in there. 100% renewable grids integrated, well, the sub details. And that last slide was about 4, 5 and star ratings. It's increasing across time. Does that kind of capture the main messages that you guys spoke about? Cool. All right. So what I'm going to invite you to do is maybe let's think about some questions to explore when doing this activity. What's important about what we heard? What does it mean to me, my family, my community, my organization? Remember when we drew like the places we want to have impact, is it you individually? It might be in your community, it might be in your organization. If there's nothing here that you feel like individually for you, then maybe wear the hat of NZN, the Net Zero Network. Their mission is to reduce, to get to net zero. So if you can't think about anything individually, try on the voice of NZN. What does it mean to NZN? What should the NZN do? What's your highest dream? What's your worst fears? These are just kind of clues of what you might talk about, but it's really up to you to explore the floor, find one, walk around, get a feel for what's on the cards and stand in the one that you're most curious about that you want to talk from. And we're going to try and facilitate a conversation, inviting all voices about what's important for you or NZN, if nothing's registering for you individually. So have a walk around and work out which is the one you want to talk from first. Explore the cards. I think the best thing, I should have taken a photograph already. I was going to type in chat, but I didn't get a photograph. You're on chat? Could you relay, Alan, and get them on chat? Yeah, please do. Please no, take part, yeah. Or you might be responding to as well. So no, just take, do both, yeah. Yes. Yep. Okay.
I think it's okay. I think I'll do it separately with these guys. Okay. Is anyone online who can hear me and wants to participate?
Oh, why not?
Okay, thanks, Hazel. So as you can see, what the people in the room are doing at the moment is that they're walking around and they're identifying things which have been talked about today, which they particularly identify with and interested in having a conversation with other people about. So I think that the way that we can modify that here is there, perhaps Hazel, if you wanted to go first, like of all the things you've heard, what was the most interesting thing, the thing which really drew your attention?
The whole presentation, to be honest, from passive solar to the passive house, the microgrid, to expand further on just, instead of just solar, it's always been a push from myself that why aren't we, being the third windiest city on earth, pushing for residential windmills? Windmills that we can then fit to our roofs to generate additional renewable sources of energy. So these are the things I've always been thinking about. And, you know, I've had solar on my roof for the last 11 years. And I'm looking at getting on-site power storage and further energy generation. It's an ambitious goal I've set to attempt to generate so much energy from renewable sources that I can permanently disconnect from the grid if I choose to.
So I guess that's tapping into the renewable energy discussion,
Yes.
the microgrids discussion. Yeah. Okay.
Microgrids, with the passive housing, with the energy conservations, and even an EV that not just charges but is capable of serving as a secondary battery to supply the house if need be.
So there seems to be a discussion now happening here, which is individual speakers speaking. So I'm going to bring us back into that, if that's okay.
Yep.
And I'm going to turn the volume up if you need to speak.
Yes.
An issue to address as we transition to other fuels. We even now have the duck curve, and then we have the valley of death with our energy. So the opportunity is to go ahead with this ideology of, say, carbon neutral 2035, but we take hydrogen and continue to run our turbines and some of our vehicles. So if you have a shutdown in your microgrid, somebody runs into your power generators or whatever, it'll shut you down for days. Whereas if you have a generator, it can suddenly fill the gap and keep things running and get more reliability. So the ideology is very important. We need to become carbon neutral 2035 in our thinking every time we get in our car or anytime we go shopping or whatever it is. And then the other is little communities with our microgrids use our gas distribution system we've got, do hydrogen, and have a generator in the community, because you also want to keep your kids with a purpose and things like that. So make complex community.
I noticed as you were talking, there was some nods in the green, but there was also some shapes, some heads, and not necessarily green. So what was in those signals?
All right. I'm just curious. I'm not the biggest fan of hydrogen personally. And I'm just, I guess, sort of related. I'm looking at both of these cards, and I'm just wondering, when it comes to subsidies for fuels, both renewable and fossil fuels, in some cases, looking from a market perspective, which is on this card, are we better off with no subsidies at all? Because if a free market approach goes towards energy, and you have free energy from the sun or wind, stored in batteries for baseload power, and there's no issues with storing hydrogen or transporting it as a low mass gas that's easy to escape in pipes. I'm just wondering if it's better in some cases because there's subsidies for renewables and there's subsidies for fossils. And in some cases, I'm wondering if there's any comments on, would it be better if there was no subsidies at all and the market just could continue without any subsidies?
We should have carbon neutral 2035. No subsidies, get rid of money, get rid of missiles, use the army to help get carbon neutral. Forget subsidies, don't even think about money, and do it like COVID-19, you just help everybody and print money or whatever you have to do to get through it.
So there was a few laughs there. Let's hear from some of those people that were chuckling.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just add on the subsidies part. Anyone who gets residential solar, there's the small technology certificate scheme, which is essentially acts for a consumer level like a rebate for you getting installed solar on your rooftop. So had we not had that scheme, I don't think we would have gotten to the residential solar penetration that we've gotten to, and you wouldn't have had the reduction in the amount of coal we're burning to provide to the grid in Western Australia. So in terms of our local systems, yes, we are subsidising installation of solar on rooftops, but if you have a look at it a holistic perspective, when we're putting energy into the grid, where are we best to put it? And by installing rooftop solar, we're using existing assets, existing infrastructure. We're not having to put up massive mounting systems, and that also distributes the energy across
places closer to where it's used. So you're reducing the amount of distribution required as well. So yes, there are subsidies, but there's also a lot of benefits. So I think there's a balancing act there, and understanding it is very complicated though.
I think I might touch on a few points. Completely agree that renewables have been subsidized. It's been very effective. It's led to the duck curve, which is an issue for the grid because we don't have enough storage. That's a significant issue on the grid and a problem I've been trying to focus on for a number of years. So duck curve is the actual peak usage of electricity on the distribution system, on the Western Power system, is during the middle of the day, 12 till 3. Over the past 12 to 15 years, year on year, as we've installed more solar, it's reduced that load, effective load on the grid, which is causing issues for turbines such as coal, particularly coal turbines, and means that they need to run on base load at burning very high cost energy for no actual output or usage. And then we have massive ramping as solar drops off in the evening. And now our peak load has shifted from 12 till 3 over the past 10 to 15 years, which when we plan our networks for 50 to 100 years, our electricity distribution system, a very short space of time to deal with such a great change from centralized coal and gas generation to decentralized renewables. Hence why electrification of transportation and buildings to use more energy and also to store it on site will help ease the pressure on the grids, which are either becoming more challenged by densification from transport-oriented development or from the duck curve itself and these massive rampings in short periods of time. The other one I just wanted to quickly touch on was hydrogen. Hydrogen is as inefficient as fossil fuels. So there's a massive misconception that hydrogen is the be all and end all.
The idea would be to sequester CO2 to pressure maintain the gas reservoir to produce hydrogen for 100 years without any emissions. But there's nobody in the country that knows how to sequester it. I mean, Chevron even can't.
Yeah, CCS hasn't been effective. But just the quick point was you've got to build, if rather than using electricity directly and storing it in a battery, to store it in hydrogen and to reuse it, you're wasting 60 to 70% of that electricity, that renewable energy. So if we're electrifying everything and using it directly, it's energy efficient.
What I want to do now is hear from some of the voices that we've heard from, and I really want you to start thinking about the lens of what can we do, right? What can I do individually for my community, my household, my organization, or what can NZN do?
All right, my karaoke is crap, so I'll refuse to sing this piece. For me, when I designed my house 12 years ago, trying to find capability in Western Australia was really, really hard. So the needle has changed. So I think for me, an action is, how do we help disseminate that word? How do we demonstrate we've got the capability and competence in Western Australia and educate that community? So that's sort of one theme for the new builds bit. Where it happens, I don't really care. It's about building that awareness that people have a choice and can take a positive action with positive outcomes. And then on a selfish perspective is happy with the house design, but there's things I can improve. I'd love to retrofit. So I'm standing over the passive house one here as a way, can I transform that building to the next level? And so that's something I think as a takeaway action, those two items is how do we build the awareness and demonstrate that capability. So people are, whenever they're engaging the builders, they're asking for either passive solar and getting them to demonstrate it, or passive house. And secondly, guidance and principles for retrofitting. So.
So actually Matt and Keith and a couple of other people, we actually have got together and formed a not-for-profit organisation called the Sustainability Practitioners Network. And it's literally what you're talking about. It's about, you know, educating people, inspiring people, and having the, you know, a group of trusted sustainability professionals and that we know what they're talking about and can be trusted. And so be like a one-stop shop for them. So that organization is fairly new. We're still sort of, you know, getting it together, but yeah, that's something that we came across that as well. It was one of the biggest things for us is just people just, you know, getting the education and showing them that there is alternatives to the typical development that they see. And the other one is I would recommend going onto a Facebook group called My Efficient Electric Home. They've got all the tips and tricks on there about how you can retrofit your house, from all the gap sealing and how to install insulation into pre-built homes and all that type of stuff. You'll get every bit of knowledge you want on that Facebook page.
Yeah.
Just put in your calendars to December the 4th, Murdoch Uni. We're having a Future Homes Expo, and we're hoping to get lots and lots of businesses in this space. We're calling it Future Homes to avoid the sustainability word, to try and reach out to the unconverted, but that'll be an awesome event, Murdoch Uni, December the 4th. We will get in there, hopefully, yeah. We'll get it out and about.
Very shortly, we're going to be moving to actions. So pair conversations to work out what we might do. What last voices need to be spoken from any of these cards before we go there?
I don't see the property developers in the conversation. So I'd like to know, are they? Do we know? You know, there's probably 4 of the largest property developers in Perth. Do we know, are they having this conversation? Or if they're not, how could we, you know, reach out to them?
So I guess I'm in the land development industry. So I'm an electrical engineer, and I know Andrew. So we do a lot of land development. Yeah, we do. So we get in the power space to deal with land development. So we deal with Stocklands, Development WA, Mirvac, yeah, all of them, Hesperia, all of these guys, and they are all talking about it. So they're all trying to figure out how to appeal to the converted and everyone that wants to go green, and they're trying to do developments that are sort of targeting. So they're trying to incentivize people with solar panels, batteries. We're looking at, I think, about 12 different projects for community batteries. We're looking at utility scale batteries. We're looking at, house designs, incentivizing people to go more efficient. Yeah, they're all looking at it. It's definitely happening. But well, not all of them, but there are a heck of a lot that are. And unfortunately, when it comes to crunch time and the dollars come in, some things get scratched off that list. But a big thing is gas. A lot of developers are not reticulating gas. They're just, yeah. So it's happening.
So I'm standing on the STAR system. Somebody, I think it was you, mentioned in your presentation how double glazing, for example, is advanced here in Australia, but in Europe, for example, it's old-fashioned already. And to go back to the developers, I really have the feeling that developers will always do the minimum required. And unless we have legislation that enforces, much better insulation, passive solar design, all these things, they'll always do the minimum required. And so our STAR system it's a good step, but it's very slow. And unless we lobby, I suppose, and encourage our politicians to introduce legislation quicker, people will always do the minimum required unless they're converted.
There's a couple of things in, I work closely with some developers. There's a couple of things in Design WA guidelines, which if a developer wants to exploit the guidelines, they have to achieve 6-star. They have to achieve more than the standard, a lot more than the standard. And it's in their best interest, because obviously they're building anyway, to go for a bit more and include all this stuff. So the government's just done it a different way. So you can do the bare minimum, but you can only get the bare minimum out of the requirements. If you want a bit more, you have to do more. So it's quite an intelligent way to do it. Yeah. It's pretty clear in the guidelines that if you want to achieve more, you have to do more. So.
Okay, I'm sure there's a voice there. Who are you pointing to?
Me, I just wanted to put in a last word.
Okay. Yeah, go for it. It's your mic. How can I deny it?
I think the important thing is, well, what I've been working on for the last 6 years is consumer-led demand. Developers are providing what they believe the people want. And one of those things is we have the largest houses in the developed world here in Western Australia because, well, first of all, builders make their money on the square meter. So they're selling you more house. And so that's why I started with friends don't let friends build badly. We have to change that, and we have to help our friends change the way that they think about a house. You know, the current culture is if you don't have 9 bathrooms and at least 7 theater rooms, your children will end up in prison. It's not a when, it's not an if, it's a when. And so we have to really work on changing that conversation, that building a house that connects people, builds community is a lot more important than a house that has 9 theater rooms and 17 bathrooms. So, yep.
All right, so I want to draw us to action now. So I want you to form groups of 3. If there's an odd number, 4 or 2. Start having a conversation. What are some concrete actions that we could take out of what you've learned tonight? I'm sure there's more conversation to have. We don't have the time, but we want to draw some actions that will make sense for NZN or you individually. So get into groups of 3, have a chat and work out what actions. How long have we got? So you finish at 7:30, so we'll give you 4 minutes to do that. Yep, cool. So 3 minutes to work it out, 1 minute to share. Yes.
Hello, for those still online. Is there anything that you want to sort of that conversation has made you think about? Let me just open my camera up. Yeah, anyone online want to volunteer an action that we could take as a group or as individuals based on what you've heard? And if you're speaking,
Well,
I can't.
No, I'm actually typing.
Okay.
Well, I'm just thinking, like what was just mentioned. So that's what I was thinking. The contact details, like I think there were a few different sources that were mentioned about the different designs or groups that could assist in retrofitting. That would be such a good resource, if I could say personally for me, to access so that I could pursue this further, to actually have the conversation with the relevant people to see how I can actually retrofit my house and whether or not I can afford the retrofitting. Because everything comes down to money.
So that can be, yeah, so that can be an action. So we can say that sharing information on how you go about doing this retrofitting. I mean, that's one of the reasons I came along. I'm organizing it, but one of the reasons I was really interested to come along today is because you don't know where to find that information. Like, what is the right thing to do?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. Okay. Like, yes, I've got all the ideas and all the things I would love to achieve, but where to even start? And I mean, I would love to have been there in person, but I really dread having to drive an hour down the freeway just for you to do it.
That's fair enough.
I'm past the end of Freeway North, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if anyone else is still on the call who wants to chip in with an action that we could take either as individuals or as a group. Might just be you and Mitra talking. Okay, right. So you mentioned earlier windmills on houses. That was a kind of wild one.
Well, we are the third windiest city on the planet. Why not urban, domestic, residential windmills? There have been designs. The Dutch, I think, years ago designed such windmills. They made a metal tree for Paris with the windmills designed looking like leaves. I don't need a metal tree for 30,000 euros. I just want the leaves. I just want the windmills. 120 windmills, 50 windmills lining the top of my roof. That's going to generate power. Each individual windmill might not be capable of doing much, but when you couple them like solar panels, we can get a lot of power.
Okay, all right. Thank you. And Anthony, thank you. Just seen that. See you later from Switzerland. I'm just going to quieten up now because what Steve is saying his final piece.
So let's start with this group over here. If we can give this group the respect in the hand then, can somebody from that group that hasn't spoken yet, please share back the action you came up.
There you go, Mary.
As you come up with the table, you just place them up here.
Are we looking for all actions?
Sorry?
All actions?
Yeah, just summarize the key ones.
Sweet. So first action was speak to the landlord about energy efficiency upgrades for the house. As a renter, you don't have much control. Require rentals to have star ratings. Requires rentals to have star ratings on buildings.
How would we action that? You know?
That can be done.
Is that like a...
Well, they have done it on the East Coast. So we just need to then work out how they did it on the East Coast and how it's implemented. Yeah.
Expand commercial building disclosure to residential. There's already a federal government act called the CBD Act, Commercial Building Disclosure. It just hasn't been passed down to residential.
Is that something that's context to be added to that sticker? Yep. Sorry, and the third one?
Third was write to the MP to accelerate housing efficiency standards.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Next group.
Oh, yeah.
We had three. One of us was going to, well, he's talking to large developers. He's in the room and in that space. So, and having the dialogue with them. Second one was, we have someone working in the oil and gas industry, pushing for best practice within that industry. And also we've got the expo coming up at the end of the year, the Sustainability Expo.
Okay, in our group, it's really education across the board on all the topics we've heard today. But for example, easy ones that the My Energy Efficient or Electric Efficient Facebook page, that I never heard of that. I don't think many people had. Let's get that out there. Andrew mentioned NEM Watch is another one. That's a good one to do. And Remy in our group, he's studying, what are you studying again? Yeah, residential drafting. At the TAFE he is at, no one's talking about any of this environmentally friendly design or anything. They don't know.
People are being trained to build what was built 20 years ago.
So that was pretty shocking. The last one is incentives. So again, like the solar panels was quite successful in a way because many people have them. What's happening with 100% electric transportation? So EVs, why aren't we getting subsidies for EVs, for example, and the policies, federal elections, use sites and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you. Next group. Don't be shy. We're friendly.
So I'm not really sure if there's a right or wrong answer to this. So I'm just sort of like a regular person that I'm not educated much on this stuff. I just came along with a friend to learn. So yeah. So the main takeaway I thought that I could do to help was definitely like when I have friends who are building houses or family, to like actually just tell them about the solar passive designing, because as someone who doesn't have any sort of environmental background, it's definitely something you never hear about from my personal experience. So.
So I guess continuing on to the ordinary people this isn't something that they've been thinking about much in the first place. So yes, it is really more of a marketing thing where it's just showing people that it is an option, and also especially for people who don't have, who it wouldn't be affordable to do a fully custom built project. That's why it has to be consumer led, so that therefore developers know that having a green option is a massive priority. And for that to be a thing, you'd need to have enough of an upswelling of people saying, oh, I actually want something like this. But on the other hand, let's say you were wanting to do something custom, things like the Facebook group that was mentioned, but honestly, something like a checklist given to somebody that was just said, here's a bunch of things that you can consider doing. Here are possible costs or approximate costs. And then you can just work through them and say, okay, I think I can do this, 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 and this. And that way you don't have to do any research, you don't have to think. I am generally of the opinion that most people do the right thing if you don't make it inconvenient. So, yeah.
Nice to meet you.
As a very similar to previous ones.
Oh, in the previous ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing. Okay, and this group?
So, sorry, what was your name?
Larissa.
Larissa said that she was going to do some retrofitting improvements to her house. Is that correct? And for myself, I've still got to, I'm actually still building a solar passive house, and I've still got to do some finishing touches to make it a bit more efficient. So that's what I'm going to carry on with. Potentially put some solar power on as well. And again, that theme of education, what was your name? Ramon said that he's going to, educate his friends and family about when they build about solar passive design, and try and come up with some easy eco solutions for them. Because he said that a lot of time they feel it's just too complicated.
Is there a way to share it? Because I think many people might make use of. Yeah. All right. So we've captured the actions. I think we lost. Sorry. All right. Is there anything to be shared from online?
Yeah, I'd like to. Firstly, I'd like to thank we've got 4 guys left online, but it's been a really good contribution actually from the guys online. We haven't been able to integrate it that well into the conversation in some ways, but they've been inspired, and there's been loads of great stuff coming up in the chat. Just to pick up on one final point down there, you've got the Real Estate Institute of WA. So I see that from time to time as an acronym, but I don't really know what they do. But maybe there's a point there about, can we work with industry bodies to create action here?
Thanks, Max, and thanks, Adrian, for pointing out the people online. I'm tangled up. So we've got a mechanism to track actions. They'll be made available, and Max, I'm sure, will share. Yep. Okay. But please don't wait. Like, if you see some actions on there that trigger something you could do now, please take action now. I think some of them might be larger problems, and they might be things for NZN to reflect on, to maybe prioritize what we should work on, some of these larger problems. But please see what you could do now and share it back to the group. Okay, right, give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Okay, amazingly, we've pretty much managed to finish on time, which is quite spectacularly impressive. We capture all the actions here onto this Trello board. So I'll share a link back into the LinkedIn group if you're in the LinkedIn group, and we will take all of these actions, digest them, and then put them onto this board. It's a public board. Anyone can look at it, see what actions on there, see if you can get inspiration. If you can do something before the next meeting, even if it's just one small step forwards in the right direction, then that's fantastic. And we would love you to come back and tell that kind of success story. Final thing is our next meeting is in a month's time, and I will post that on LinkedIn and Meetup. It's going to be a bit different because it's going to be the first meeting for about 6 months where we haven't had a keynote speaker, and we're doing that intentionally because we want to see if this format is working for everyone. So we want to do a bit of a retrospective, identify if the journey that we've set out upon to try and create meaningful action through getting together like this, if that's actually working for us. So we've been doing it for 6 months. Let's check back in and see how it's going. I'll share more information on that in due course. But thank you once again for your contribution. If you've got anything burning you want to get off your chest that you haven't already discussed, I'm sure we'll be going down to Steve's to go and have a beer if anyone wants to join us. Cheers.